Ministers' comments today.
All right, I'm still just trying to clarify whether you have walked away from the principle of emissions trading.
No, we are looking at all the schemes, including emissions trading, better emissions trading schemes. We want to look at all the alternatives. One of the things is that the Treasury were prohibited. They were told you cannot model any of the other major alternative schemes that are presented around the world. They just modelled a very narrow version, and they assumed that every other country in the world was part of an emissions trading scheme basically from day one. Of course, how fallacious and ridiculous that was, and now you superimpose, a world economic meltdown, and the whole irrelevance of that Treasury work is now being properly exposed.
Andrew Robb, a lot of this debate, of course, has been consumed by focus once again over the past week or two on Peter Costello. What is going on there?
Well, before we just finish on this thing, David, I mean, the Prime Minister today, in trying to defend a deeply flawed emissions trading scheme, a centrepiece of their whole 3-year term, did not know perhaps one of the key elements of the emissions trading scheme. He did not realise that coal was not to be given any assistance. Thousands and thousands of jobs, 5,000 jobs in Xstrata alone. And here he is on his feet, 2 months before we vote on it, and the Prime Minister does not know the detail, is ignorant of the key elements of his emissions trading scheme. No wonder industry are pouring through my door, one after the other, in despair about the thousands of jobs, the ignorance of the government, the failure of the government to engage properly on this, the arrogance imposition.
Coal, that if they did address that, if they did offer free permits or some sort of rebate to coal, you'd get on board?
Well, what we put with the Shergold model was that we bring in a scheme, but you give 100% protection up to world's best practice for all of the trade-exposed industries, including coal, until the rest of the world come on board. I mean, the coal industry is competing against Mongolia and Indonesia and South Africa. None of these countries will have a scheme, probably in my lifetime, for that matter. Now, we have to do things, have a scheme designed that doesn't strip jobs out of the Australian economy and export them out to Mongolia and Colombia and all these places that are very serious competitors of ours in coal. The Prime Minister must have sent a signal of, enormous concern to industry across Australia today that he could stand there 2 months before we vote on this scheme and not know perhaps one of the key elements of their emissions trading scheme. It beggars belief.
Now, briefly, before we go, Peter Costello, what's the deal? What's going on? There's a lot of focus on what's happening in the party.
Look, again today, we asked 10 questions today in the House. Every question, the government obsessed about the coalition. We've got 80,000 people who lost their jobs in the last 2 months in Australia, and yet the government turns every question of ours into some obsession about Peter Costello and Malcolm Turnbull.
Is nothing going on?
Peter is a very strong contributor. I mean, Peter was the greatest treasure in Australia's history. He's got so much to offer. But Malcolm is the leader. Malcolm is doing an excellent job. I mean, a very impressive performance on the weekend. He's giving us direction. And, the thing is, we are focused. Ironically, we're the ones focused on jobs. The government are focused on us. And, at a time of great crisis around the world, we need a government that is not obsessing about its opponents, who's not feeling vulnerable politically, who are actually sitting down and doing the hard yards on keeping Australians in work.
What did you make of that survey in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday, that more of your colleagues want Peter Costello than Malcolm Turnbull? Apparently a poll of you and your colleague. Were you surveyed as part of that?
Didn't call me.
They didn't call you at all?
Didn't call me, and actually the colleagues that I've spoken to, none of them... a handful that I've spoken, the only ones I've spoken to, every one of them, none of them were called.
So the claim that everyone was called, you're saying is wrong?
Well, it certainly didn't. I had no knowledge of this thing until Sunday, so, I treat it with a grain of salt, and I just look at the facts. We're the ones who are focused on solutions and jobs and all the rest of it. The government's the one who's focused on us and obsessing about us.
Andrew Robb, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, David.
We'll take a break and come back with more from our panel, and also some new research on just how worried Australians are about the economic slowdown.